Hi, my name is Karen, and today I would love to talk to you about one of my favorite Bronze Age conspiracy theories, which is whatever happened to Ankhesenamun, the great wife of Tutankhamun, who you probably know as King Tut. And you might be surprised that there are conspiracy theories about this, but let me tell you, the rabbit hole is deep. And I'm not about to make an argument to you that everything I'm about to say is factually proven and correct. It is a lot of implication, reading between the lines, but I think it makes for a really fun story, and I think it really makes the political life of the late Bronze Age, it just really comes alive when you hear this story, and I think it's a good one. So today, that is what we are going to be talking about. This story also involves the Hittites, the people that I'm supposed to be making a video about that I am procrastinating pretty egregiously. So that's one day gonna get out to all of you. Until then, we're going to talk about conspiracy theories. So our story begins with someone I think I've talked about a lot on this channel at this point, which is Akhenaten, who is a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty towards the end. He is the one who took the capital of Egypt and moved it from Thebes to Amarna. And that was like this nowhere place. And he converted it to a monotheistic religion that worshipped something called the Aten, or the sun disk. So this is different from Ra, who is going to be our sun god. This is purely the disk form of the sun, and we are worshiping that now. As you might imagine, this was not a popular move. It put a lot of priests and temple goers out. Everyone pretty much believed in their own personal god. Egypt has never been particularly particular about their gods in the ancient world. If you have a god, they are willing to adopt it and throw it in the culture, or they'll believe in your god, but they believe in their gods more, or they'll worship a bunch of gods. They have a personal god, a regional god, a state god. They are all about all the gods. So to say that all of those gods aren't real, but the Aten is real and everyone's just going to worship this now, was very controversial at the time. Akhenaten had his work cut out for him. And he did have a relatively long reign, so I think it was somewhere around 19 years. And then he dies. And he leaves behind his wife, Nefertiti, who you probably know as the most beautiful woman in the world to have ever existed. There's a beautiful bust of her that we've all seen. The succession has a problem, and that Nefertiti does not have any sons who can become a successor as the pharaoh. And she may be trying to put her name in the ring as the one who's going to be pharaoh, but that doesn't really fly. So eventually it is decided upon that it's got to be a cousin or a half son of Akhenaten who is going to become the pharaoh. And the way that one becomes pharaoh in Egypt oftentimes isn't that you're just going to be born the son of the pharaoh and his great wife, because that doesn't always happen. Or, there's a lot of infant mortality, so maybe they have a son, but then that son dies. So you've got to have options. And you might have a son from a lesser wife who gains the succession. You might have a cousin. You might even have a general or war hero. They're not too precious about the royal blood to become pharaoh, to be clear. In this case, what happens is that probably Tutankhamun, which is his name at this point, is the probably son of Akhenaten, possibly cousin. And he is married to one of Nefertiti's and Akhenaten's daughters. They have 6. The daughter is, they think, the third daughter, and this is Ankhesenamun. And she and Tut are really, really young when they are married. So Tut becomes king probably when he's around 9 years old, and Ankhesenamun is probably 12. Very young, both of them. That means that neither one of them is really in control of any of the politics that are occurring at this moment. And that might have been Nefertiti's desire, because she potentially holds on to a certain amount of political clout. But eventually the person who is going to gain the most political clout from this regency is a person by the name of Ai, who is an advisor, we believe, in the Akhenaten period, but he is continuing over and holding over into this early Tutankhamun period. And he, we believe, is the one who encouraged the Egyptians to let go of the monotheism, move the capital back to Thebes, and for Ankhesenaten and Tutankhaten to change their names to Ankhesenamun and Tutankhamun. So instead of worshiping the Aten in their names, they are switching to worshiping Amun. They are Moving back to Thebes, they're letting go of this worship of the Aten, and it is believed that these young people didn't have too much control over their destiny. So this would have been a decision that is made by or other powerful Egyptians, potentially fellow priests, who generally speaking are going to be the sons or heads of noble families. The power is with this kind of more spread out group. Time goes on. These young people grow up, as they do, and eventually they start trying to have children. And we know this because in Tutankhamun's tomb, there are 2 examples of fetuses. So some form of miscarriage probably occurred. And here's where our first little bit of conspiracy can happen, because there is evidence of this occurring within the Egyptian court at various times. Was Ankhesenamun the victim of a miscarriage, or was she poisoned in some way to make her have a miscarriage? A key component of this theory that definitely one should keep in mind is that if they are half siblings, that means that they share grandparents. It is safe to assume that there really could have been genetic abnormalities with these fetuses, and that is the reason that they did not come to term. But that said, there are people who potentially would be invested in Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun not having children. And the main person would be who has been acting all this time as the regent. And there are other people too. So anyone who is maybe a powerful priest, or even the military leaders, would have some certain incentive for Tutankhamun to not become a powerful pharaoh. There's some speculation that Tutankhamun had some sort of difficulty with walking. There are a lot of canes that are found in his tomb. So that would imply that he probably had some physical limitations, perhaps from all that incest within the Egyptian royal family at this point. And he, while an active person who apparently really enjoyed charioting about, he probably was not able to walk without the use of a cane. Now, a big component of being a pharaoh in Egypt is that you go out and you fight whoever your enemies are, and you are at the head of the battle. So it's really important in Near Eastern and Egyptian kingship that the king actually go out there and fight. And this is not something that Tutankhamun would be able to do. Who wouldn't like this? Well, we have some generals who are eventually going to become very powerful, and that includes Horemheb, who is going to eventually be a pharaoh in Egypt, the last one of the 18th dynasty, and then eventually also Ramses I, who is going to be our first pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, both of whom are powerful political leaders of the time. Obviously is holding on to a regency, and as soon as Tutankhamun starts to leave that regency and have children of his own and his own political power, then potentially he is going to be losing out on quite a bit of power. And then just in general, we don't know how attached either Ankhesenamun or Tutankhamun were to Amun, or to continuing the polytheistic lifestyle that they were forced to adopt as children when the capital moved away from Amarna to Thebes. So it's completely possible that they might have still had some form of allegiance or a desire to return to the monotheistic Aten worship. And that is pure conjecture. But if I'm thinking about reasons why it would be that someone might have an incentive to be sure that Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun did not have children, those could be various reasons. Now, we know that Tutankhamun dies somewhere around his 18th birthday, so he's very young. There, for a while, was some conjecture that maybe he was poisoned. That does not seem particularly likely. It seems that he might have died in some form of chariot accident. If that is the case, then was the chariot accident manufactured? We don't know. That also is part of the conspiracy. And the person who would be most likely to have caused this accident would be And the reason I say that is because he becomes pharaoh after Tutankhamun, but not right away. Before he can become pharaoh, Ankhesenamun sends a message to the Hittite king, and his name is, and I can say it, is Suppiluliuma. I'll try to say that 3 times fast. So Suppiluliuma has some pretty good records that we have access to. He has his whole life biography, basically, that he got written down. And in it, he includes this really interesting story about a wife of a pharaoh who sends him a message saying that she needs a husband. Her specific words can translate to, "My husband has died and I have no son. They say about you that you have many sons. You might give me one of your sons to become my husband. And I would not wish to take one of my subjects as a husband. I am afraid." And you might be thinking, wow, how do we know? Because Ankhesenamun is not ever listed in this. That is not in the Hittite records. How do we know that this is Ankhesenamun? Well, this is a 21-year-old young woman. She's left alone. She does not have children. And she is afraid. Why is she afraid? Well, if her husband has just been murdered, or perhaps even just died under suspicious circumstances, and there's this old regent, who is now trying to gain power. And the way that you gain power and potentially to become pharaoh is to marry this woman, this widowed woman, then yeah, she has plenty of reason to be afraid, because if the wrong person gains control over her, then she has lost complete control of her destiny. So Sup-il-Uliama is really surprised to have received this message, and he says, we gotta check this out, because it's really suspicious that a pharaoh's wife would say, like, come send me one of your sons and I'll marry him. So he sends off, he gets the matter investigated. The advisor and boy guy comes back. He says, yep, she actually does want to marry a Hittite prince. Great. And so Sup-il-Uliama, I can say it, I promise. He sends his son, another one that I'm going to have to say, Zan-Nanza. He sends his son to go down to Egypt to marry the pharaoh's wife, the widowed pharaoh's wife, and he is going to become the new pharaoh of Egypt. Is there a better deal for a Hittite king at this point? Because he is one of the great powers in the Near East, along with Babylon and Egypt. And if they unite, then together they can really control this really pesky area in the Levant that has been causing all sorts of trouble for them. It really shores up control, and that means that his grandsons potentially are going to become the future pharaohs of Egypt. And what the Hittites want more than anything is to be on the same level as Egypt and to broaden their control so they don't have to send out as much political and military might in order to maintain and keep that control. They are trying to stabilize their region as much as possible because of the Hittite geography, which makes it very susceptible to invasion from pretty much every side. You can stabilize the Levant and Egypt and have a really reliable ally there. Then there's nothing better that a Hittite king could want. Unfortunately, that is not what happens. His son, while going down to Egypt, is murdered. And you'll remember, Ankhesenamun, who we're assuming is the one who wrote this, has said that she is afraid. Well, apparently she had a reason to be afraid because her potential husband gets murdered on the way down to Egypt to marry her. Anyway, what happens to this woman, this pharaoh's widowed wife? We don't know for sure. She kind of disappears from the record after this. So we know with a fair amount of certainty that she married Ai. Now, Ai may have been her mother, Nefertiti's father, so it may have been her grandfather. He might not have been. We actually don't know what their official connection was. What we do know is that there are some rings that there are records of. I think there's been one at the German Museum specifically, which has in a cartouche, which... If you don't know what a cartouche is, it's like a little kind of rounded off rectangle where the name of a ruler is written. And the cartouche is how you know that it's the ruler. So that's the shape. And they're named cartouche because of the French. They thought they looked like bullets. And so that's the name of it. So there is a record, and I don't think I have a specific image of it, but if I do, I'll throw it up, of a ring that has Ai's name in a cartouche and Ankhesenamun's name in a cartouche, implying that they have married. What is interesting is after this, there really is no record. We don't have an official mummy for her. We don't know what happened to any tombs. There is no tomb. There is like potential that she was buried in the Valley of the Kings in tomb 21. But that is not genetically confirmed or anything, and there are no grave goods that would indicate for sure the identity of this female mummy. What we do know is that who, if you want to talk about tombs that are interesting, this is a sidebar. The reason Tutankhamun did not get grave robbed is because he was not buried in a conventional pharaoh's tomb. He died too young. He died at 18. And the tomb that was ready for him, presumably, was Ai's. So this advisor buries Tutankhamun in that tomb. And then the tomb that was being prepared for Tutankhamun is the one that Ai ends up getting buried in. And there is no mention at all in his tomb of Ankhesenamun. Instead, his wife, Tay, is the senior wife that is mentioned in his tomb. So if he did marry her, he did not talk about her particularly, and she just is gone. So the conspiracy that I guess I'm touting something because it's all conjecture. Like, I don't know this, no one knows this. But it seems somewhat likely to me is that Tutankhamun dies in mysterious circumstances. Ankhesenamun is afraid. She sends off to the Hittites that she needs a husband who can protect her because she does not want to marry one of her subjects or servants, that is the vizier, who is a much older man. She is 21. Her potential husband comes along. He is coming to Egypt. He gets murdered. She has no choice now but to marry and then she disappears. Is she murdered? We don't know. But this is my favorite Bronze Age conspiracy, that there was a woman once who was very close to power. She was thrust into this position just by virtue of her birth. From a very young age, she was in a susceptible and vulnerable position, and that continued until her potential death. What is also interesting in this scenario to think about is what would have happened if Zananza had made it to Egypt and had become pharaoh, because that would have changed the complete landscape of the late Bronze Age with a very united Hittite and Egypt force when in probably about 40 to 50 years from this point, they're going to be in a huge and major war with Ramses II, who's going to be our third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty. Ai becomes pharaoh. He rules for a little bit. Horemheb, that general I mentioned earlier, becomes pharaoh after Ai. Neither one of them has an heir. And so Horemheb designates Ramses I, one of his generals, to become the pharaoh after him. And the reason for that is because Ramses I has a son, Seti, and a grandson, Ramses II. Ramses I only rules for a few years. Seti gets a little bit longer. And then Ramses II is one of those really long-lived rulers of Egypt who becomes a great and famous pharaoh for all the ages and is potentially the pharaoh that we know of in the Bible with the Exodus story. If that Hittite prince Zananza had made it to Egypt, then Ramses II, never could have been the famous pharaoh that we know. So history could have looked a lot different. So thank you for joining me for just a short little episode about my favorite conspiracy theory. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye!